Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 9 of Healing the Divide. Today, I am joined by a dear friend with a background in law, political science, history, and also a very skilled and adept and seasoned yoga teacher and activist in so many ways that I cannot wait to unpack how she shows up in the world. Welcome to Healing the Divide, Paola Cala. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Thank you for what you said. Sweet. And thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm excited.
I'm excited too. For our guests, we are going to get into it today. We are going to be talking about some really, really important issues for us to be talking about as human beings on the planet. This time, we're going to get into the theme of decolonization and how colonization is both a movement that has spread across this planet that has been so destructive in so many ways. And I also want to get into the colonization of the human consciousness and how some of these ideas are so baked into our psyche and our identity that it informs the way we see, the way we speak, the way we think about issues. So we're really going to be peeling back the curtain and looking at life through the lens of not just the big macro philosophical perspectives, but the very human perspectives as well. So I'm excited to get into this with you. And Paula, I want to share a brief introduction for you. First off, in her own words, she comes from the heart of the world, Colombia, also known as the land of magical realism, a territory that has shaped her body and heart, but has also influenced the lens through which she perceives the world and from where her perspective emerges, shaped by the non dualist essence of her ancestors that intertwines humanity with nature. In the dance against societal domination, political, economic, and social, she aligns with anarchism, advocating for individuals to relate in love, equality, freedom, and mutual support, and create societies where we all have sovereignty over our wills, abilities, social processes, and organizational forms. This vision extends to an ecocentric embrace where humanity is not separate, but an intrinsic part of the natural tapestry. Amidst the unraveling colonial paradigm, she finds inspiration within the cracks, spaces pregnant with possibilities for decolonial transformation. These crevices unveil glimpses of alternative realms where power is decentralized and communities harmonize with the rhythms of the earth. An ecocentric anarchism rooted in poetic resistance envisions a future birthed from equality, sustainability, and the liberation of interconnected spirits. Wow, that says so much. So much. I can't wait to dive into this with you. So, can we start by just landing us on the map of Paola? Can you share a little bit of your own origin story within the frameworks that you feel comfortable speaking to? Um, uh, Help us understand not necessarily the what's of it all, that's your own private journey, but how you have come to believe what you have come to believe, how you've come to see the world. What are the influences that have shaped you to see things the way that you do?
Hmm. um, well, like I said on my bio, um, I'm very shaped by by the territory where I was born and raised. I believe that even the natural makeup, the minerals and the plants and everything that where I grew up, like also has shaped my my desires, the things that I like. Um, the stories that I grew up with, the political context, and the historical context too. My friends, I mean, everything that any human in society experiences is what shapes, that person and the cosmogony of this person. So I feel like Colombia shaped, me. And since a little girl, like, I saw different struggles. I saw, different social classes. um I feel like I moved a little bit in between, like, different worlds within these social classes, and that actually gave me, like, information on their struggles, on inequality. So I remember, since I was a very little girl, I was aware of that. I don't know exactly why, but it was something always within me that, that was in my heart and in my mind, that I thought about. And, like, why is this like this? Why are there kids and people that have, nothing to eat, when there's, like, all these other people that have, so much privilege? And I learned about I learned about human rights when I was, in school, when I was a little girl. I think I was like 7 when I learned about the rights of children. In Spanish es los derechos del niño. And I was living back then in a complex, and there were so many buildings, and we had, like, 3 parks. This was a huge complex, and there were nothing for the kids to play. There were just parks with trees and beautiful, but no playgrounds. So that's when I organized my first protest, because I learned the rights of children. And um, we wrote a letter demanding that, we had a playground for us. And we slept on a mango tree that night, and we didn't want to go home until we got in writing that the community was going to get together and make that happen for us. And we actually made it happen, and that community has, these things for the kids, because of that little thing. And I think that, like, planted the seed for so much more.
That is an incredible story that I have not heard you share before in years of friendship. And I'm so grateful to see little Pao, the protester, in there, has been there this whole time. And now to see you and in your adulthood and your womanhood, so you stand so strongly in your voice. I invited you here today. I have this conversation because, Pao, you stand in the authority, in the voice to share equal rights for all people. And I think some people look at that, the strength and the advocacy of that, and they just see words like anarchy and they just assume burn it all down, tear it all down. And I think there's so much more depth and so much more nuance to this conversation. It's important. The intention of this podcast is for us to have a conversation around healing the divide that exists on our planet. And perhaps, if not the largest perpetrator of that divide, are these large colonial projects that oppress the rights of the indigenous populations in these respective territories all across our planet. And I want to get into the details with that. And I feel reticent too at another level. I just maybe self-aware that, we are talking about issues that it's to some degree just having a philosophical position is privilege. And I'm not a person that holds negativity towards privilege. Let me say that. I hope that privilege is the goal. I think may we all be privileged. Let's move us all up into a state of safety and health, but let's not be blinded by the perspective that we speak to things from. And so I think it's important that if we're going to have a conversation around what human beings are dealing with on our planet, not just historically, but right now, in the same moment that we're in with our feet on this earth, there are human beings deeply suffering. There's genocide occurring on this planet as we speak. There's oppression on this planet as we speak. One common bond that Paola and I share is a deep love for Eastern Indian philosophy, specifically, and there's an invitation that I wanted to extend to you if you're open to it as a way of holding space for this conversation. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a meditation practice called Tonglen, and you might be familiar with this, but it's where we take the seat of the safety that we happen to be in, and the ground of our being, and essentially it's almost like a collective co-regulation practice and prayer for healing. And we imagine that as we breathe in, we could draw in the suffering that exists on our planet, and that we can use the alchemical power of a grounded vessel that we are blessed and privileged to be in right now to transmute that suffering energetically into healing. And we can hold a positive vision for that healing to occur on our planet, and that we can set a prayer and an intention that our conversation today, and that the ripple effect of our conversation for those who listen to it and then feed that out into their own conversations, their own sutras of conversations in the world, that we can contribute perhaps in some meaningful way to the necessary change that we might have differences on how to achieve, but we share the perspective on that it is needed, and that we can tread lightly and sensitively. So if you're open to, would you join me in just taking a few breaths with this
Yeah, of course.
intention?
Hmm.
Okay, thank you so much. And for our listeners, please, if you're in a spot where it's safe for you to just take a few slow, conscious breaths, and let these be breaths of service. We'll just take a few seconds for this intention to enter into our shared collective space. And so I thank you for that. And part of me, is just here to ask questions, to listen, to learn, to understand, to grow, to contribute to healing on our planet. There's a lot of things I don't understand. There's a lot of perspectives I haven't ever lived in before. And I hope this is an opportunity for myself and everyone to learn from the experiences that you have had, from the young protester, the playground protester in Colombia, to this moment right now. And with all that said, Paula, I wanted to invite this perspective in and get your thoughts on it. Are you familiar with the Carmen line?
The what?
The the Carmen line, Karman.
No.
So the Carmen line is the the line of where our atmosphere ends and outer space begins.
Okay.
It's actually only about 62 miles north of the mean sea level on the planet. It's not that far away. It's closer than Miami for us in Florida. And it's like, wow, outer space is closer than Miami. That's
Wow.
wild, right?
Yeah.
And so exactly. So talk about witness consciousness, right? For the yogi in you, is if we could move to the witness consciousness of the Karman line for a moment, and just look down on the earth as it exists right now. What's your take? What do you see happening here? Give us the big picture through your lens.
It is existing. It is existing, and is within that existence there's forces of power, and they're moving and Earth is trying to find that balance, because when things are weighing too much to one side, it creates an imbalance. But I think that's also part of existing, of manifesting, um, of living, Earth as a manifestation, because I see Earth as a body. So just like a human body.
Hmm.
So from that perspective, that's what I see Earth doing, is existing within all
Where
its forces and possibilities.
where do you see human civilization in its development, its collective developmental psychology in this existence? Are we like toddlers? Are we teenagers?
I don't know. I It's hard for me to visualize it that way, because I feel like from our perspective, our worldview, like when we people talk about like maturing or being teenagers or whatever, is putting a hierarchy.
Mm,
Like for example, like children, they don't know enough, like they need to be taught. And like that's part of the actually anarchist critique
hmm
to the system, that we impose, and we actually kind of like form, shape, and help shape children's worldviews and minds. So for
So,
me, it's hard to answer to that question like that. Where I see humanity as I don't know.
so how do we reconcile non-hierarchical structure with the recognition of consciousness evolving to greater clarity of its own true nature? And when we see these forces of power over that are at play, it seems like we don't want to let that interest be the interest that dominates the experience of the planet. So,
To which
given that it's
interest are
not
you
so,
referring? Sorry.
say it again,
To which interest are you referring?
governmental interests, um, corporate interests, I don't necessarily see much of a demarcation line between them. My personal view is that most of our governments around the world have been captured. Coming from somebody that lives in the United States, I think that we live in a corporatocracy for all intents and purposes. I think we could reduce that down to a few different corporations that have got a stronghold, etc. And there is a proliferation of war and um, and oppression and domination that is exerted upon a great deal of the planet. I don't believe that somebody has more inherent value over, but I do believe that there are hierarchical structures of influence on our planet where you and I don't have the power to take this conversation and change the nature of that dynamic just through this conversation. We can contribute towards it. But if we had accumulated more influence, then my standpoint is that this expression of consciousness could bring more healing. I'd like to see it have more power, not as a power over, but more influence. And so what I'm asking is if and put it in a different context if that one doesn't work for you, but when you look at the structures that wield the greatest influence on our planet, where do you see that in the lifespan of the earth? Do you see us as evolving beyond that? And are we in our early, let's instead of making hierarchy, we're in our early evolutionary process? Are we having a midlife crisis and that's what this is? Because it doesn't feel like the wise elders are present.
I get you. Okay. So I'm gonna sound super crazy.
Bring it.
I even see time not as like going one arrow out, like future. Um, I see it like as a sphere kind of
Mhm.
thing. And this is just my own crazy like pals talking. I don't know. We could be like our ancestors could be the evolved version of us.
Mm.
Do you think? Do you see where I'm going? Like, so you know, through history, this kind of separation happened, where all the forces that govern the world, to say that, became like split into the indigenous and non-indigenous, the colonized, and the indigenous worldview. And I think is that separation, and in this side where we are in the colonized worldview, or what is called dominant worldview, um, we have fallen out and far far from source, from earth, from nature. And I think that's what is causing all this illness. I feel like Mother Earth is she's sick, and our consciousness is so um, not disconnected, because we are part of nature, but our lens is so clouded that we see that disconnection and we act from it, and we act like we are that. And but at the same time, I I see the indigenous people that have resisted for hundreds of years and even thousands. Like, there's indigenous cultures in South America, in my country, that have existed for 16,000 years,
Mm.
and their knowledge. So, so I don't know. Again, it's hard for me to answer the question, because I understand your question as like pointing one arrow,
Mhm.
like seeing evolution as past, present, future, and
Linear.
I just can't see it like that.
Got
So my best way to answer the question is the division of dominant and indigenous worldviews, the divisions of worldviews, and what we have built from the dominant worldview and created systems of oppression, of accumulation of resources, of not taking on account that we are nature. So we put ourselves above nature in a vertical, hierarchical way, utilitarian. And we made a social contract. I was talking to you about the social contract a few days ago. And
Mhm.
we made a social contract where we actually sign up for that, to give up some rights in exchange of some privilege. And that caused all kinds of crazy stuff.
So understood, and I appreciate the reframe and taking us out of linear time and really inviting a different perspective that isn't hierarchical and isn't linear. And and it brings me to thoughts of that really is the core and the crux of yoga's teaching, that we've fallen into a mistaken self-identity as a being that is born, exists, and dies, and behind the changing nature and the evolutionary impulses is a essential nature that is birthless, deathless, and eternal. And when we operate from that premise of self, that's a shared premise, and that the recognition of that in one another is the ultimate expression of bringing out a life around us that is an accurate reflection and representation of the truth of the world as it lives and exists within us in the most fundamental way. And one of the texts that teaches this is the Bhagavad Gita. And there's a teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, an actual definition for yoga. It defines yoga, I believe, 6 different ways inside of the Gita. And one of them is yoga is skill in action. So what in your analysis represents skill and action within the context that you just described?
Skill in action will be um, understanding
Mm,
um, that we are nature. Um, and when I say understanding, is like literally see, water and trees and mountains as like living, because they are living organisms, um, with the same, rights and wants, even the want to have fun and celebrate exists within nature.
mm,
So skillful action will come from that, like understanding, because when you have that clarity, your action, um, your action is gonna come from that. So it's not gonna want to oppress or
mhm,
repress or suppress. Um, solidarity, mutual aid, um, um, acting from a place where I want to cooperate and not compete, from
mm,
where if I need something, I take what I need, um, and are mindful of living for the others. um, Cooperation, I already say cooperation, equality, and and knowing that equality, when we talk about equality, is not about like everybody living in the same like colored house, and it's
mhm,
about equality of where you are in life, like what equality in not only in your rights, but in your the word you in your privilege. And I guess like privilege will be taken out of there, because
mm,
it will be more like having your needs met, your basic needs met, because when there's privilege means that somebody, there's other groups or something else that doesn't have that,
mhm,
and then act from that. I think when the human beings have their basic needs met, they don't have to worry about that, don't have to worry about what am I gonna search for food today, and I'm going hungry, and where am I gonna sleep, and not having access to water or clean air. And so once you have a life with dignity and those basic needs met, then you can explore your higher self, your talents. We're all so different, our brains are wired different, and some of us are not very good with speaking, but good with something else. There's people that are gifted with music and so many talents. um, and that actually brings to mind like the things that we value. In this dominant society, we have given value to things that are actually like very abstract and not real. I was talking actually this morning to one of my clients. She was one of the first judges in this country, female judges in this country. Um, and she was talking up to me about something that happened in the courtroom, where this man kept asking where was the judge, with her being there. And he asked like 3 times. And so then she said, well, I guess I was a cleaning lady. I'm the cleaning
mhm,
lady, and I'm here to mediate this issue. So then he was like, oh. But then when she was talking to me about it and she mentioned the cleaning lady, I was thinking, I'm like, why do these societies see the cleaning lady as something kind of like the judge up here and the cleaning lady here?
mhm,
Um, the cleaning lady should not even be called the cleaning lady. Um, I think that's kind of derogative. Um, I feel like every person in society, whatever their degrees are, and that's why the comment I made when you asked me about my um, like
Background.
background, yeah,
Mhm.
because we have given more value to academic, to titles. When, if you wanna, if you have fun, like cleaning, like, and you enjoy that and you're good at it, like, you have to have some skills to do that, and those are just as valuable as the skills of a surgeon, or the judge or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I land somewhere in the middle there. And it'll be fun to kind of parse this out with you. I see first and foremost a shared value between us wherein having our basic needs met should be ideally a fundamental right for all beings. The fact that there are so many beings, so many humans on this planet right now that are starving, that do not have access to water or a safe home, that the economic social disparity on this planet right now is massive, and we have the resources to address this successfully. It could end by the time the sun goes down if we were not in such a dominant oppressive dynamic for a world. So on that, I think I don't have any point of contention. I shared agreement, and I think that's true. I think when we get beyond that, once we have established baseline needs, then I move to meritocracy, that I don't want there to be homogeny, because I think that destroys creativity, and that we each have different proclivities towards different things, and that it's vital for the health of a society for there to be incentivization there. And so I think I lean a little bit more that way now,
You cut off for a while. I'm sorry.
where everything is equal. I think that destroys creativity, and there's not an incentivization for specialty and motivation. And so I actually appreciate that maybe for me it would be look a little different. There would be a baseline or a floor that everybody has, so nobody's falling through the cracks. Once you've established said baseline, then it's a meritocracy. So just saying that, like, we're not going to live in the same houses, we're not going to have the same things, there's going to be economic disparity. Um, as long as everybody's fundamental is met, I'm perfectly comfortable with people having
I got you.
different lifestyles. Okay,
Okay.
cool. So then
So,
from let me hold on, let me just finish this last piece
okay.
before we go back to, because you
Okay.
had said something about the hierarchy. And now I disagree with the idea that um, that one job is worth more than another. At that point, I'm back to agreeing with you on that. I think, I've spent so much of my life trying to bring healing into people's lives, and there's people that have a lot more prestige, a lot more success in conventional terms by
Mhm.
Western culture standards, and I think that's sad. I think there's plenty of examples of the way in which we've assigned value to occupation, and that what we've lauded as a culture and lifted up and said this is something we should all aspire towards is bullshit in so many ways. Um, so I think we need to be mindful of the floor. We want to be careful of what constitutes ceiling, and making sure that we're not saying this is worth more than that. But I do think there's a deep need for variation of expression, and that there's going to be difference, that some people are going to have more than other people. But I believe in the idea that everybody has an opportunity, to the degree of their own interest and skills and propensities, that they can go for that if they want to. But I don't want to see sort of like everybody having the exact same life experience. I think equality and homogeny are a fine line to dance. So
Well,
what's your
two different
feeling on
things. They're completely different things. Equality is very different than homogeny. That's how you say it.
that?
I understand.
Mhm. Got you. Okay.
Yeah.
So your
So
thoughts.
yeah, you can't. That's those two completely different things, and I mean, you cannot have the replicate of a life experience. That is actually impossible, I think. Um, yeah, like I don't know. I think we don't aim for that. That's not
Mhm.
like, you know, everybody has to have like, if I want to work more, I'll probably gonna get a little more resources than, somebody that loses, more leisure, chooses more
Yeah,
leisure or whatever. The
exactly.
difference is in the value system what we give value to, and also within the system of, so that equality and possibility, that equality of basic needs met cannot happen in the current system. It's completely impossible, um, because of the social contract that we have created.
Do you mean within the United States, or are you saying, or are you
No,
looking at abroad?
within the dominant worldview, within all these dominant systems, which are actually extractivist systems. So there's so much like we have to kind of like clarify, because a lot of the
Mhm.
stuff that I keep hearing people talking, and I'm like, well, that actually didn't happen like that. There's a lot of kind of like uneducation and ignorance. Um, and that's part of the system trying to stay and survive, right? Is to create this like ignorance. So the more ignorant people are, the less they're gonna be able to resist or to create something different, or to even know that that is not working and that's not what they want. So there's a couple key things. The structure, the structures of power, private property, the concept of private property, um, the state, um, the state as this organism that guarantees the social contract of this modernity world, or modern world. Um, so in this, when we entered this social contract, we gave our individual rights, we gave up our freedoms, um, and we left the state in charge of protecting those freedoms, and we also gave it power to protect it through the criminal system and through
Mhm.
politics and through all these different other systems. So I think that basic needs like floor that you're talking about and I talk about really cannot exist within, if there's systems of oppression. um, Sometimes it's hard to see that, for example, being from the United States and only knowing this, people don't know, like you open the water faucet and your water comes out of there.
Mm.
You sit down and you have plating your food, but you don't know like which hands uh, cultivated that and made that come there, and how much oppression these items that you're eating and how much destruction they're causing because of the way, it's not because you're eating food, it's because the way it's being handled. Because,
Mhm.
we have clean water here at the cost of the global south, um, not having clean water, not having water. We have so much privilege in the global north. So we don't think about those things. We don't think about, wow, like we are having all these cars and building all these things in here, and the materials that we're using for that are coming from horrible. The thing that can hurt actually Mother Earth the most is extractivist processes. So mining is I was explained this actually by a mamo. Mamos are called the indigenous leaders of the Kogi culture, and he was explaining to me, like, imagine Earth is the body of a woman, and when you are mining, you're literally, it's like you're ripping through her organs, her vital organs, and there's so much suffering, not only material but spiritual,
Mm.
that comes from that. So those things that we're not aware of. So when we talk about, private property and having all these privileges, it comes at the cost of another, people that we don't even sometimes that they exist. Like, we think about recycling, plastic is the way to go, and that we're saving the earth. And I thought of that like for so long, until it has to go somewhere. And is, first it was going to China, now it's going to the Amazons.
Mm.
And the clothing, everybody here loves to shop, and the TJ Maxx and all the bargains and all this stuff. And where does this clothes go, when people don't want to wear it anymore because fashion is moving so fast? It goes to the desert in Chile, to one of the most beautiful, like, places on earth, and is being destroyed. So, we have to, I like to invite people to do this exercise that actually exists within Buddhism, the Heart Sutra, and like meditate on, sit down, and when you're gonna eat, like, do a little research where your food's coming from. What are they putting on your food too? Because all of those are forms of control. um, you know, we're we're growing as sick individuals because our soil is depleted. Um, we are using medicines that nature gave us everything. Nature gave us medicine, wisdom, everything. And we completely denied the indigenous world, and we supplemented for this dominant kind of like fake, reality that is just creating more like death and decay.
It's like this saccharine version of something real, and it's like the Truman Show, and we're just living in this fake representation of, like, drive your nice car, get the good meal at the restaurant, like. And behind the curtain of colonialism is this massive amount of suffering of our people and our planet, and that's what I'm hearing you say. And it I have so many questions. So I want to glean a better understanding of your worldview. I have an understanding of the dynamics and the dominator oppressive um, paradigm and how you see that. I'd love to get a little more specific. I think that we're throwing around some terms that are somewhat loaded for people. So maybe if we could lean into some of your political science background or understanding of history, if you could maybe create a comparative political framework. Sometimes we can understand something better by what it's not. And please also forgive my ignorance here too. But actually, don't forgive my ignorance. I welcome my ignorance. I'm glad it's I'm glad it travels with me. I travel with intellectual humility. I'm here to learn. But when I think about things like, we live in a constitutional republic with a representative democracy, um, or at least supposedly so. Uh, um, Systems that are, and with a capitalistic economic structure, communism, socialism,
Kat, sorry,
nihilism.
can you repeat? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Sure, that's okay. The They're listening and cutting our signal, Paola. um, so yeah, I just want to look within a comparative political framework at other systems of governance, and place this idea of anarchism on a map. I'm starting to understand that this is like left end of socialism? Are we far lefting out here? And then, if so, I have lots of questions around that. But I did pull up this definition for our listeners of anarchism, and it is a political theory advocating the abolition of hierarchical government and the organization of society on a voluntary, cooperative basis without recourse to force or compulsion. Is that something that you agree with, disagree with? And I'm just going to I'm going to front load this with a few different questions that I have and just take the ones that speak to you. So in this system, how does it compare to other systems? And where people sometimes go, is anarchism socialism, is anarchism communism? Let's clean this up a little bit and
Yeah,
find a
it's
common thing.
important. Thank you. I appreciate the question. So, anarchism is not a system because it will like that's a contradiction. It's a philosophical system. A political theory could be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Anarchism has so many colors and so many shapes because of its nature. It's it's very adaptable. It's not a close-ended thing. It's not a finality. It's possibilities. So anarchism as a movement actually came at the beginning of the 19th century um, as a response. You know how when you explain the different yoga philosophies, they were like responding to each other and talking to each other. That's what
Mm-hmm.
happened with the industrialization, the industrial revolution. Um, Out of that, um, the social classes struggle, started to happen. The accumulation of capital and the horrible conditions of of the workers. So the working class was born, and when this working class was born, they started questioning a lot of things, and they needed a revolution. They needed something for because they were being oppressed. So out of this, it's kind of like as a response of this new problem that colonialism has created and industrialization has created, um, the socialism and communism um, philosophies were born. And as a response to that, kind of like anarchism was born. It's pretty cool. So they were just a bunch of people that had all these problems, and they were very intellectual. They were philosophers, and they started, young Marx and all these guys started talking and thinking and coming up with solutions, because that's what we humans do. When there's a problem, we want to create a solution. So um, communism is actually the evolution of socialism. Um, Socialism is kind of like used uh, as a transitional space to get to communism. In history, so this is one fallacy that I always hear people. Oh, you're a communist, or this communist country. Actually, in history, there has never been a communist country or a communist state, because actually in communism, state disappears because social classes disappear. So it's impossible to have a communist state. What we had experienced are socialist governments and socialist states. Um, Now, in socialism, there is a strong presence of the state. In communism, is gone. I think communism is very ideal, and that was the critique that the anarchists gave as a response to. So if you look for the first international communist, it's really cool because there's Marx and there's Bakunin, who's an anarchist, and they will write each other letters, just
Hmm.
like talking like this. It's beautiful, and they're just trying to figure stuff out. Um, the communists, what they believe, what they believe is that there are, two social classes: the capitalist and the workers. Um, the capitalists are the ones who, or the bourgeois, are the ones who own the means of production and the resources. So, like we talk about, these big companies that own
Mm-hmm.
are like, they shouldn't, but they have like titles on our land to be exploited.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they manipulate, they have their hands on healthcare, they own like everything. And there's the working class, who is kind of like stuck in a wheel, which actually Marx explains very well on his book The Capital. And I love that book because it just it's kind of like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where it's very like, it numbers things, and it kind of like shows you in a very easily to understand frame, um, all these different forces that are at play. So what the communists want is to have a social revolution, and to have the the workers class be the ones that govern, that that the state is there to benefit the working class. Why? Because in a capitalist system, and in our current system, the state is to protect the needs and the privilege of the bourgeois or the capitalist. Um, so I see it as like something that is the same. You're just changing shirts. You're just changing who's on top and who's underneath.
Do you
Um,
mean like in terms of elections within a democratic system? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
how. I mean, within that and within the communist proposal or the social
Okay.
proposal, like they want to be on top, but still a hierarchical. It's not satisfying everybody's needs. They believe they will, and that eventually the state will not be needed. But I don't believe in that like force of authority, and the anarchists, that was their critique to
Mm-hmm.
the communists and to the socialists. So anarchism came to be named as the left of the left,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Hmm.
because um, we criticize that coercion. When you are in any regime, it can be capitalist or communist or socialist. Um, it's always going to be oppressive. Um, there's always we're gonna need the state, and the state is always gonna repress too the individual. Um, when we talk about democracy, actually, democracy is a lie in this system, is a lie in both a communist or socialist system, and is a lie on a capitalist system. Why? Because it's still giving, it's not participative. Democracy is representative, and within that representation, I mean, how can you call it a democracy when none of the so-called leaders, that are to be your representative in government, are really answering and to your needs? They're supposed to work for us, the people, but they don't. They work for the interest of the owners of the means of production.
So is that by means of an extension of the function of the system, or is that, do you perceive that as a failing of the human beings that are in power within that system? Do you see it as systemic and inherent?
I see it as the system is like a seed. So either
Hmm.
or capitalist or communist or socialist, because socialist would be a transition to communism. But uh, there's a seed where there's a seed within us humans, um, to do amazing, beautiful life things, and there's also so much capacity for destruction and and hurting, and we are hurt, so we hurt others. So when you put that seed and you plant it on a soil, that seed is gonna develop, a certain plant, and that plant is gonna be, an authoritarian, um, hierarchical, because both systems tend to corrupt the individual with the illusion of power. You understand?
I do.
So
I,
we talk
I
about bureaucracy and corruption. So, for
mhm,
example, I think about Cuba and how the history of Cuba and the need they had to create this revolution, because they were being oppressed and completely like raped by other countries, by United States and by other interests, and they were living in horrible conditions. So there was a need for this revolution. And actually, Fidel Castro, he wasn't even a communist. He didn't like, he just used socialism, because we're talking about, again, when the industrial revolution happened, all these new ideas came out, and the
mhm,
workers, the people that were oppressed, saw in that, because it was a lot about collective rights. They
mhm,
saw in that like, oh my god, we have these great tools to get rid of our oppressor and of our oppression.
mhm.
um so it was his brother and Che and other people that surrounded him, that actually had those and that wanted to install this socialist type of government in Cuba. And I also think that communism has been used as this like phantom, as this like tool to scare people, like, oh, if you don't this, we're gonna be communist. Or
Mhm,
if you do this, or if you think this way, this is gonna lead to that. And people don't even understand what communism is.
mhm.
In the idea is beautiful. It can be beautiful. There's things that I don't agree with, but there's a lot that you can rescue from these movements, such as like collective rights, which we all enjoy from these collective rights. um, and and the I think there's so much possibility and beauty in struggle and like forces going on each
Mhm.
other, because that also leads to other possibilities, and to create and to find other forms of being and relate to each other.
I agree. I remember the first time when I actually learned a little bit about what communism actually was versus the pejorative with which it was so carelessly bandied about as, this worst critique that you could offer of a society or a human. And I remember just going like, wow, that's beautiful. There were things I didn't agree with, and there's things I
Mhm.
still don't agree with. And it sounds like you land similarly. And it feels like this is true for so many issues, actually. Like when we stop demonizing as a
Mhm.
propaganda tactic, and we start to look at the actual intentionality, not the co-opting of the human participation inside of it, but what is the intention inside of trying to create a system like this, you can see that there is some beauty there. And maybe, yeah, there's something that we can. I don't want to, I realize you're using the word extracted in a negative sense earlier about like mining the minerals of the earth, but extract
Yeah, I got
from
you.
these philosophical systems. And so I want to get into a little more detail. So thank you first off for the clarifications there: communism, socialism, anarchism, etc. So I did hear you say earlier that anarchism is not a structure. It's anti-structure. It's not a system. It's anti-system. It's a political philosophy, if anything. And so in this ideal, there's not a am I correct in understanding that there's not a state, or is there still the existence of a state?
No, there's no state.
No,
Actually, what anarchism seeks is the abolition of the state.
the abolition of the state. Okay, that's what I thought. So there's no state, there's no government, so there's no electoral process, there's no leadership, there's no hierarchy. Is there a distinction here between private property and personal property?
So in anarchism, there's no private property. However, um, anarchism is very fluid. So what it proposes is um, kind of like create your have like freedom and autonomy as a society, as a group of people, to create, the how you want to interact with each other and live based on your needs. um so there's, for example, and I cannot talk much about them because I'm not a, like, I don't know much, like, about the Zapatista movement. But the Zapatista movement is not even anarchism; is its own thing.
Hmm.
But a lot of anarchists love the Zapatistas. I love the Zapatistas because just the way they are, and there is a movement of indigenous people in the south of Mexico in response to neoliberalism, to extractivism, and to companies that came and like completely violated their rights, and was pretty much like ethnic like cleansing for them.
Hmm.
So they fall a little bit more into like communist style of government. And when we talk about government, it's not like government as we know it, but like way of like being in society. um so the answer to your question, is there private property in anarchism? No. But
Okay.
you can find like different ways in which to create like economies. So that's the other thing. We fall under the fallacy that if it's not this, is that. And I see political candidates using that so much to gain votes. If you don't vote for me, you're going to become socialist. If
Yeah.
it's not, if we get off the rid of capitalism, it's going to be socialism. Why
Hmm.
are we not in capacity to create something that works for us, and that doesn't have to look the same for the people in Bolivia than it is for the people in Finland? Because, for example, there is another economic system or economic philosophy that came out in the 70s by um, Jack Fresco, I think is his last name. But he was talking about resource-based economy.
Hmm.
And I learned a little bit about it, and I think it makes a lot of sense to to use the resources that you have, in your region or territory. um yeah, and kind of like have that balance of using those resources with, imbalance. It's not taking too much that is gonna hurt the earth, because we don't realize when we're hurting the earth, we're hurting ourselves.
So definitely in agreement with you in some of those pieces of living in harmonious balance with the planet, and maybe, and this could probably lead into a conversation around limits and regulations, and the degree to which we want, like, who's the arbiter of those regulations, and how do we establish limits without governance. So a couple of questions. So nobody owns their own home in this vision. Is that correct? If we don't have property, like, how do
No.
I know that
So
this is my?
it's very different. It's because it's something you're trying to kind of like imagine something based on the models and the systems that we have.
Well, because I'm putting it into, and not to cut you off, but I'm trying to put it into present moment, realistic, operating under the scenario of, like, okay, so let's say we're like, okay, this shit isn't fucking working anymore. We need to do something different. We have taken it to the breaking point. I think a lot of people would agree with that the system that we have is not a sustainable or fair or just system, and we're getting tired of it. So I'm over here shopping. I'm going, hey,
Yeah.
what are some other perspectives? Love to hear them. And then when I hear, well, there's going to be no, and I'm gonna blasphemize this thing, but, like, that you don't own your property. There's no state. Like, what's happening in, put it into the yogic standpoint of spanda, which for our listeners is a tantric idea of complementary and co-creative opposites. I know, Paola, you're deeply familiar with this idea. And so one representation of that was, like, if we want to experience freedom, we need structure. This feels almost so amorphous to me that I'm like, how does anything actually happen? How do we have any shared agreements where, how do we live and function without some social contracts, some structures to live within? And maybe there's not a perfect system, but
Mm-hmm.
is it, maybe that's the flaw. So I want to get beyond the utopianism of, let's just take away the power, take away the structure. But my question for you is, how do we function if it's not a system? How do we function without a system?
Okay. So it is a decentralized. So there is a system, but no system as we know it, like imposed system. Um, it's kind of like it's very utopian, but at the same time, because it's very fluid,
Mhm.
um, you can take the basics of it and and apply it to what is being created. So one important thing when you talk about anarchism is to understand that that all the institutions, and when I speak about institution, I speak about church, I speak about government, I speak about police, and I speak about even family. Um, to be able to have uh, a state, no like the state, but a state of like being within anarchism, these
Mhm.
institutions have to be destroyed. And that's why anarchists gets like this bad rep. Oh,
Burn it.
the
Yeah.
chaos and whatever and destruction.
Yeah.
It's because we talk about the destruction of these institutions. Um, because we're talking about against seeds. You
Hmm.
know, you cannot ask a bean, a seed of bean, to become an orchid, right? So if we go back, all these oppressed systems of oppression come from, um, colonization and from the institution of the state, which actually was born in Rome and in ancient Greek philosophy and imperialism, and we have to even go farther back. So these institutions have to be like completely eradicated, and we can create things that are new, where we talk about, so going back, the three bases: equality in accessing to what we need,
Hmm.
and solidarity, so mutual aid, Um, so when you talk about like how can we make it work, we can't make it work operating from our current worldview. We can't now make it work that way. So, and that's what I think a lot of the anarchist philosophers, and that's my big critique to anarchism, is that anthropocentric
Hmm.
um, worldview, and that still dominant worldview, um, and dualist worldview, where nature is denied and where spirituality is denied. Um, so to put it in context, all these philosophies and all these systems, including capitalism, they were born out of dialectical materialism.
Hmm.
And dialectical materialism is completely, the opposite to idealism, where, there was like the divinity and everything. So it stayed very much in the material world and is not taking in account um, the spiritual world, which for me is hard to divide,
Hmm.
but our current systems live and are sustained from that notion, from that division. Um, so when we talk about again anarchism, is a complete like let's get rid of this, like whole Shiva, like
Hmm.
take it down, like destroy it, and and make something new with love, with like caring for each other, caring for what really matters, which is life, which is, evolving as a human being and as community. So it gives like so much to your individual rights, but also um it honors, our sociability and our need for each other. So yeah, I'm trying to answer. So if you're trying to like think about like anarchism, like completely like build an anarchist society right now, it's not possible, because we're coming from the colonized mind, and with the colonized mind we can't give birth to this other world. However, if you look at the indigenous people, I'm not going to say that they are anarchists, but there is a lot that they are already doing and living our within our dominant system, that still show us so many beautiful characteristics and of anarchism and to aim for. And nobody's saying that we have to become like them, because that's what like
Sure.
all these people, oh, do you think I want to live in a hut? It's not about that. It's about like we need new social contracts.
Yeah, that's my question though, I think in
It's a new
inside of
social
all.
contract.
Yeah, like what is it? What is that actually? Like, so we have not a state, but we have social contracts. Well, who's negotiating them? Like legitimately, not just like the people, but how does this happen? Who's getting together? Who's the person that's speaking? Who's signing the agreement? Who's agreeing? What if somebody doesn't agree? Who's enforcing the agreement? Isn't that the beginning of the organic necessity of a government?
Yeah. So there could be a government, but not as we know it, not as the conception of government that we have. For example, um, there's different like kind of like examples of how it could look like. So federations, um,
Okay.
assembles.
Yeah.
So uh, within anarchism, democracy happens in a direct way,
Hmm.
where
Versus a representative way.
yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
And where people they are all at the same level, so nobody can like have more power on their votes or whatever.
This
um
electoral college and
uh,
the like the electoral college and the super delegates and all the ways that they have like baked in ways to co-opt the electoral process. So the whole democratic process is a little bit of a, not even a little bit, it is a farce, right? And then, your vote counts more or less than somebody else's, and then they just collectivize it all into like your state, and it's like, yeah, what a mess. And then that doesn't even take into account voter fraud and things like that.
Yeah.
So are these then, like, is there a larger body? Like, let's just take the United States, for example. There's no, so under this thought experiment, there's, so this is my thought experiment. This comes down, and anarchism is blossoming in its place, and in its ideal fruition, there is so I'm assuming a borderless, um, non-identifiable mass of land that we wouldn't call necessarily America. Like, we couldn't really put a title on it, and maybe, I don't know, you can speak to that. And then within that, there's either federations or assemblies that are operating, I'm assuming, at primarily local levels.
Hmm.
And then I'm wondering, because of the nature of resource accumulation, how there would be any sort of federal, like, is there some larger umbrella, like, to ensure that but this floor that is wanting to be assured of equal rights, that is occurring? Like, isn't this sort of this feels like the ideals of the beginning of America to me. It's like we leave the grip of the central church of England. We fight for our independence, and we start to go, okay, well, let's have, the system of checks and balances. We're primarily a collection. We're United States. We're a collection of individual and subjectively sovereign states. We support freedoms of the individuals within the country. I'm not saying this has happened. And then we put forth our vote to represent who we want to represent us, as close to as our local district, gets to go all the way up to DC and represent, our local district. And then that system interacts with, at the state level, and then with not just the state level of governance, but the senators, and then they're interacting with the executive branch, the judicial branch, etc. So I don't mean in the way that it's occurred, because it's fucked, but in the way that it was imagined, it feels like a pretty incredible system. I feel like our Constitution is a pretty amazing document that's written with the ability for it to be amended and changed. I know you disagree with me, because you're thinking it's based on something that is got an automatic dominance hierarchy embedded into it. But I don't see how we can have structure in the anarchistic system. That's what I'm having a hard time struggling with. So I'm hoping you could,
So
like,
the
spouse.
antithesis defended by anarchism proposes the creation of institutions by free agreement.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Let's get into that a little
Okay.
bit.
And by association of, the citizens, or, in the community, the individual. And also points out the need for an education that is very different, that the education that we're used to, which allows human beings to reason on their own,
Hmm.
and have autonomy, and, hopefully, achieve, true freedom. um, it considers the coexistence between human beings, that this coexistence should be determined by the will and reason of each one. So I know what you're thinking. I'm like, like, we are so, like, different, and some people are want to take more. So this is where the part of the ugly part, and what we see happening right now, the destruction. Like, right
Yeah.
now, we're witnessing the collapsing of this system. I mean, Earth just say no more. I mean, you see migration, because our global south is so beaten that people have to move, and it's like it's causing more and more destruction, is more wars. And this is kind of like the natural um, way in which this system that cannot be sustained anymore. It's not infinite. It has to come down. So within all this, there's so much suffering. And within this suffering and struggle too, there's so much that we are discovering, and it's creating, it's kind of like pushing us to look in other places, in to like take our awareness away from what is being imposed to us. And it's like I even bring neurodiversity here. It's like kind of like it's an invitation to have more of like a neurodiverse look of the world, um because this shit is not working. um
Yeah.
and so within that, I don't know if you can tell, like when I talk to young people, and I'm not, I'm gonna say every young person, but I see so much wisdom and so much like desire to do things different, to create
Mhm.
something different. And that's actually another part of anarchism, which the shit has gotten so bad that people are finally getting to be like, okay, let's take a look of this and figure this shit out and just try something different. We don't know how it's exactly gonna look like because there's no finality, but we're in this together and we're gonna do it differently. And you see like other like other postures. It's like another rhythm, like we're used to like this beat, and there's another beat that is beaten differently. There's, it's kind of like it's disabling the
Yeah.
the structures. So within that, there's growth in the spiritual level and in
Hmm.
consciousness. And from that higher consciousness, and from that, like, a spiritual connection, is where emerges, these societies with kind of like an anarchist characteristics can emerge. People, and this is very idealistic, and this is what a lot of anarchist authors, talk about, like Bakunin, saying, like, we're gonna suffer so much that we are gonna value other things. Like when we're on the other side of this, we're gonna begin to value, each other and other things more than private property, or more than like having just so much more accumulation. Um, like how much more happiness can $1 million bring to a bank account of a billionaire?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just think that they're not. So at one level there's identification with materialism. At another extreme there's a disidentification with materialism, and then as you pendulum to center there's the capacity to have material possessions and objects without identifying them, just as a means of enjoying existence, and that to the degree that you worked for those things based on the values, the monetary value assigned to the exchange of goods and services, you were able to accumulate or inherit those certain things. And if you're not using that as a way to negatively impact somebody else's existence, I don't personally see so much of a negative there. And so I see there's more, like for me, it's like taking it in. I'm challenged by the idea of like, how does it function? Like that's where I keep coming to as I'm taking it. I start to think like, so we have this agreement, right? Like we have a shared agreement based on something, but there's always going to be a degree of variance within the consciousness of the collective. And so without these safeguards, what happens to the person that steals, to the person that kills, to the criminals? Are there not laws that are enforced? And how
I
does that
think
piece go?
you're having a hard time understanding this because you're still looking from the lens of what you know, of thinking like if somebody steals, it's because there must be a horrible human.
No, I
Like,
don't think they're necessarily. I'm not saying that. I just want to make sure you're not putting words in my mouth. I'm not saying that they're a horrible human because I'm not conflating their behavior with their identity.
no, I'm not
But I
saying
do.
you're saying that, but when you talk about like we need a system to kind of like not let somebody steal, we're pretty much you're not saying it, but it's like, okay, but how about we, instead of punish and go to the end of it, we go like, what's causing somebody to steal, or what's
Hmm.
causing somebody to create violence? So is the systems of inequality and oppression. So again, like, we go to the very floor. When there's basic needs met, a lot
Hmm.
of the societal issues we experience right now are are gonna disappear. I'm not gonna say gonna disappear, 0% or 100%. Like, they're not gonna be there, but a lot of it is because of the way we're brought in, like, we're raised, like the concept of
Hmm.
authority, the repressed individual, the repressed gifts that we like, the person that has to go to a job that they hate because they have to bring food to their plate, and they finally blow up, and we live on this like so it's impossible for you to be able to see something if you're like not looking at what's causing all these other issues. And what's
Yeah,
causing these issues is a colonial paradigm where anarchism doesn't say that you cannot enjoy the fruits of your labor at all. Like,
okay.
that is there, but it's like, we don't need a repressive system or institution to to coerce somebody because of something they did, because society in anarchism is very different. Right now we're in a society that um, where just a handful of people are accumulating resources, and that's causing so many issues, and this very system continues to stay in power because of the same issues we have, because these issues we have, it doesn't allow us to come together. It doesn't allow us to free ourselves, to emancipate ourselves. So um again, this current system is falling apart, and within the cracks, are other ways that are being created, and and that are looking to satisfy the needs, of the individual and of the communities, so these communities and individuals can flourish. And that, we don't know how it's going to look like. That is up to, and that's part of the autonomy of the communities, how they might be very different from another place, but there's kind of like a shared agreement on how we go about life, without being binary, without demonizing each other,
Hmm.
without not acknowledging your humanity and dignity, or the humanity and dignity of the
Yeah,
other.
I agree. I agree with the ideal inside of that, and I want to move on from this and share one last thought on this piece, and give you the last word on it before we shift into like putting it in a particular context. So let's say we do this, and I'm imagining the deconstruction, the abolition of society as we know it, and then the emergence of a new paradigm set within the ideals of anarchism. And I am admittedly nascent and somewhat ignorant in the nuances of what this really means and looks like, but I'm curious. I'm deeply curious. And I I keep feeling that you said something earlier, that there's something sort of Im- implicit within the seed of the human psyche, that power over dominance, hierarchy, structure. And I would imagine it this is quite a conundrum that we have. This is sort of like the decolonization dilemma in my mind, that when you open up this new potential, that seed will begin to act. And while the group may have an agreement over here, there is going to be outliers from that group. And while it sounds great on paper and first glance to say, so cool, let's get to the heart of why you committed this crime, I think that's actually really beautiful. I think that our system that is so deeply punitive in its approach
Mhm.
right now is falling short of what this could look like. I agree with that. And I don't see every time somebody commits a crime, there's like counseling. It's starting to look like San Francisco in my mind, like where it's just like, I'm going to go steal stuff and it's not going to matter because there's not consequence. And I think that we need those things in order to actually protect the value that is agreed to. There's got to be some measure for when someone says, well, so great, so we're doing your counseling session because you stole, you know, whatever, but that doesn't actually stop the stealing in an immediate way. Now, longitudinally, as we get to the root and not addressing the symptoms, yes, but I think that should happen simultaneously with some system that prevents the issue from continuing to occur. Right? We can't just allow everybody to just go do whatever. So I think we have laws, we have society. That's what I visualize laws and legislation in its most idyllic form as representing the shared agreement, and then we debate these ideas and we choose them. Now, again, humanity. I even think there's something about the magnetism of power that, had, to some degree, has drawn a certain frequency of consciousness towards it that's more susceptible to the power over dynamic. And I think a question that um, maybe I'll give you this question is, how does healthy consciousness coalesce around power? Change the word power if you don't like it, to influence, but impact. How about that? How does healthy consciousness coalesce around impact without resorting to the tactics of violence that people that are in power now will use to defend it? Does this make sense?
No.
How does healthy consciousness, how does a healthy being or a
Okay.
healthy group of people create the shift? So I'll put it into a context, because they're not just going to politely, if we say, guys, it's time, like, I wrote a nice poem, I want to share it with you, I hope it connects to your heart, and if so, can we change the structure? And I do understand your point that, like, because the system is steeped upon a consciousness of separateness, it will fall, and the system's falling in real time. But to me, that's almost like, it's not fast enough for something that's being called anarchy. I feel like it's actually moving kind of slow. It's almost like waiting. It's beautiful in the sense of, like, I'm waiting for this thing to come down. But in the meantime, there's lives being lost. So putting it in context, to get more granular, largely colonization occurs by means of genocide. There are three levels of genocide alerts. Genocide watch is declared when there are signs of the early stages of the genocidal process taking shape. A genocide warning is declared when the genocidal process of preparation by perpetrators and persecution of a targeted group occurs. And then a genocide emergency is declared when the genocidal process has reached the stage of genocidal massacres and other acts of genocide. Looking through this lens currently, right now, in this moment, on this planet, there are two genocide warnings: the ethnic conflict in Manipur, India, and Azerbaijan's planned invasion of Armenia. And then there's also a genocide emergency, which is the Israel Hamas situation, war, I don't even want to call it conflict anymore, in Gaza. Um, so can we talk about this? Can we take these, because we've been talking kind of about it philosophically. So my goal is
Hmm.
to drive it into current moment context, apply what you're saying and how you see this and how you see us getting out of it according to the philosophical basis that you've espoused. And, like, let's try it on. Again, tread lightly, because we're talking about real human beings in deep suffering right now. But if there is something of value, if it's all of what you're saying or a piece of what you're saying, I really want to invite our listeners to lean in, get curious, and let's put this into application and see if anarchism could speak in the center of this conflict and could be heard. Would it offer, what would be the value that it offers in your estimation, Pal?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's there's so much there.
Yeah,
Um,
take your time. It was a huge one, so take your time.
yeah. So I feel like there's kind of like two forces at play. Um, with what's happening, the genocide all of the Palestinian people. Um, we're seeing we're seeing the true nature of, and we're seeing also the kind of like the effects of colonialism, of um, this disconnect that we have with nature and like our nature, um, where a group of people feels threatened by the very existence of other, and by the force force occupation of of land, and the oppression of for so many years of one group towards another. um we see also um a response to this oppression, kind of like in desperation, because we created all these value systems and these models, um, that are so hypocritical and that justify um, this cruelty and these terrible things that we're seeing right now, or that we're seeing like in history. And I feel like what we're seeing is the inevitable, the inevitability. There you go. Of the seed that was planted by colonialism.
Hmm.
So we see the collapsing and the so much loss of human life and of nature. This land that is gonna take, or I don't know how many years, or never gonna recuperate. Um, so it's not a it's not, it's a horrible, horrible sight. So we have to look in that the opportunities to do things differently. It's like an urgent call to see this is not working, but we want to impose and continue make it work the way it's not working.
Mm.
So we're asking for ceasefire because there's gotta be a ceasefire. 2 months ago, since October, this should never happen. Like this slaughtering, and is calling us to act out of our comfort zone, not only to the people directly involved in what's going on, but as like entire like world, as humanity, like we need to change our posture. We need to change the beat, this beat that has been going on for hundreds of years. We have to get another rhythm. How anarchism can fit in here? Oh my God. Mutual aid, solidarity, uh, changing our value system, um, knowing that these institutions that we give power to and that we put our well-being in their hands of, they fail us. The UN, NATO, I mean, we talk about international, rights and international agreements that are one-sided, that only benefit some people, but in reality it doesn't apply to everyone, because because the interest of a few. So I think what anarchism can bring here is a lot. Stop believing and give more power to the people in power. um, it's, this is a calling that, for us to dismantle, yeah, these systems of oppression that, for example, when you cast, I was talking to you about that voting, when you cast a vote in this fake democracy, you are saying, yes, I agree to this social contract and this is working for us. And I don't believe that, I heard a little bit of like some of the candidates, and like none of them will ever like represent, me and like so many people that I know, and represent life. They all represent their own interest. So I feel like we can start now. Disobedience is such a big thing, and it's such a powerful tool that I, wanted to talk about, actually, because when we the struggles and the struggles can lead people to do so many different things. And when a community is being oppressed, there's a point that they have to find a way, however that looks like, for them to take their oppressor and be like, stop. And and sometimes that's gonna look like, things that sometimes we don't imagine or think of. But hurt people hurt other people, and we continue that, we're going to continue create like, you know monsters of destruction. So one tool that a lot of anarchists choose is disobedience. Like, how about, let's say, if 60% of the population doesn't go to work tomorrow, that will collapse everything. and
Hmm.
and it would probably give us negotiating power. Will be like, okay, like, you need to stop this shit right now, or
Hmm.
we have the power. But another fallacy that this paradigm, that's how you say, or paradigm has created, is that we are helpless and that we're not empowered. When we have all the power, we give them our power. We vote for them. We buy their products. How about where you place your money? And this is how anarchism looks in the present moment, functioning within the system, because, you know, me alone, Pao, or this little community cannot get rid of, the way the world works right now. But if we start claiming right now in the present, and we start kind of like acting, um,
Hmm.
we start creating that other rhythm that I keep talking about. So, look at your nutrition. What are you eating? What are you consuming? How are you consuming? What companies are you supporting with your money? We're seeing how, certain companies have been boycotted, and they're actually, losing. And economy puts a lot of pressure on countries and on states and on systems. So we have the power, we just don't realize it, because first of all, we're not given the time and the opportunity to actually kind of like have these moments of introspection, and connect to our wisdom, because we're always like trying to survive. We're in survival mode. So that's when I was talking to you about the, a little comparison to the chakra system,
Hmm.
where, like, again, if you have, those basic needs, then you have time to explore other things. And one of these things that, that everybody as part of society should be exploring is, you know, politics, not in a like bureaucratic way, or not in the way like the system works, but like politics is like the way we act in society.
Hmm.
So a way that we can start kind of like embracing this anarchist, I guess, calling or philosophy, will be, being more autonomous, like not really doing your research, and not like letting, the media that is, always taking a narrative.
Hmm.
um I mean, there's so much you can be doing, advocating for collective ownership and management of resources, um and just being like sweet and soft and good for each other, like helping one another. There's a bird in Colombia that I forgot the name of the bird, but this bird creates houses for other birds that don't have the capacity to do that. So we see it in nature, and this is another imitation of anarchism, is to like kind of like observe nature and the system, how they work, like the solidarity that exists within nature. And that's something we can do right now, and that's something that I see in anarchists, like people that, how you say, identify themselves with this philosophy. They're all about, mutual aid, like communal, you see this in Colombia a lot, communal, like potlucks where everybody contributes, and there's so much that is created out of these public assembly. So I don't know if that responded your that response that responds your question.
Yeah, I want to share. You talked about the sort of unhooking ourselves from the screens, the way we consume media, the need for creativity, art, poetry, thinking freely, supporting each other, helping the not just voting, not just in the political structures, but in the lifestyle choices, how we spend our money, et cetera. So I had written something, and I was wondering if I could share it with you.
Sure, love that.
Okay, thank you. It's a poem. It's called Politrix. The thing about the Politrix that gets me the most is the illusion of choice, the powerlessness of so many voices crying, screaming for change against a deranged system with too many problems to list them, like a partisan delineation of choice, bedrock by a two-party system with cable news mouthpiece talking points, parroted by constituents complicit in co-opting their own voice. When a people believe they're sovereign and free, but they're just repeating the points that they heard on TV, perhaps we need to revisit our own history. To illustrate the point, let's revisit 1913 when we handed over the power to print our own green. Now we borrow against a debt that could never be repaid. Our citizenry lay slayed in favor of a corporatocracy that has stolen our freedom. Our human rights lay bleeding on the floors of foreclosed dreams at the hand of a spineless machine keen on perpetuating the need to always want more. I abhor a thought system so rigged in favor of a few, while the rest of us clamor just to make our way through. So while these special interests persist to fund these campaigns, we can point fingers. What else can we do right now at this charade called super PACs, throwing sacks full of coin behind a hidden wall to make sure their man gets elected and their clandestine issues protected while our democracy falls? And all this goes down against the backdrop of a flawed electoral college and the gerrymandering of districts that restricts us from choosing a candidate on election day that reflects the true will of the masses. So with spirits defeated, so many people sit home on their asses like, do you want the bigot on the right or the puppet on the left? Our system bereft of truth in favor of a false juxtaposition that we call red and blue, and we fight with each other, distracted from the truth, while our youth are fed images of these colorful scenes on the screens, making them actually want poison for breakfast, and we let them digest this genetically modified crop. So big farms stay rich. Now, where they're bitch, the food gets us sick when it could be used to heal. But instead, the school lunches serve a meal that will ultimately lead us all to the clinic, where we will stand in line for a dose of medicine to heal the symptoms of a broken system while the root cause goes untreated. A nation defeated, unconscious of its own demise, because it's so caught up in the guise of looking good on the outside. But the inside has taken a back seat. So please, let's not keep repeating these same delusions, these intrusions into a nation, a world that lost its way, beheading a person for thinking a different way, denying someone the right to marriage because they're gay, walking into a church and ending people's lives, or going to a festival and pulling out an AK and choosing to end their lives because of how they choose to pray. And I sit here and I look at this and I pray every single fucking day for me and for you and my children and your children and their children, and hopes that maybe we can turn this thing around. And maybe I'm crazy, but I'm holding out hope and I'm doing my part because I believe in the power of you plus me, the color of we. But we desperately need to turn this thing around. So choose wisely where you place your votes, not just with your ballots, but with your dollars and your decisions, because in the end, the future we are writing holds no luxury of revisions.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. It gets emotional when I when
Yeah.
I share it.
Oh, yeah. It makes me emotional.
Yeah, it's a. I do have two. I have two core questions. If we can spend a few more minutes, or do you have a moment?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so a couple of things that I wanted to hit on, just getting a little nuance, and we can flash around them and you can knock them out fast. How do you reconcile the intentional manipulation of minorities and marginalized populations by establishment politicians that claim to represent them? How do you use another yogic virtue, viveka, to suss out the difference between authentic action to support human rights and equality for all versus policy that is designed to foment victim narratives and, in my opinion, certain DEI policies that create the appearance or illusion of justice in order to sustain political power? To me, the last 4 years have really shown that in maybe it's largely, it's, I think it's both sides, but what I've seen it with Biden's administration, and I don't even want to say it's Biden and his administration's Biden, to me, that the last 4 years have really shown that well-meaning liberals are being manipulated by a great PR campaign. But if we could see behind the curtain of Oz, we would see an increasingly authoritarian state. And I don't just mean the United States federal government, but the larger collective of aligned global interests that collaborate to sustain the globalist mission. It feels like it's a giant trap door that says, be good, don't be racist, support, these policies. And then that funnels everybody that's well-meaning and thinking they're doing the good thing into this giant authoritarian trap. And it just feels like it's being co-opted. And I wonder if you see that, if you agree with that, if you recognize that. So when you say you're like the far left end of left, historically, when I've looked at left, like at that end, I'm like, yeah, no, thank you. Like, especially coming from within the yoga community where everyone's like posting their black boxes on their Instagram, and it's like lazy performative activism that is trying to, like, well-meaning, like, no, I'm going to stand up for the good thing. And it's like, but right behind that is an agenda that's trying to funnel you in to a narrative that is actually sustaining this oppressive dynamic. So are you going so far left that you fall off the other end of that and see it, or are you in agreement with that and in opposition to what I just shared?
I got you. Okay. So, yeah, anarchism is out of that, out of like the whole spectrum. And I fall out of that. I really see, with Biden, with Trump, with George Bush, with Clinton, with Obama, with all of them, they have done, they're criminals.
Mm.
They are criminals and they are so hurt people. And all these systems and all these politicians and all these people in power are so damaged that they are just damaging everything and others. um
Mm.
and this is the tricks of politics, what you were the things that I could hear from your poem is that social movements, I do believe in the Black Lives Matter social movement as like the struggle that and the need for that movement, but it got co-opted. by
Absolutely.
politicians, and that's what's going to continue happening if we don't do things differently, if we continue to believe and participate on this, like obeying the rules that have been established in this fake democracy. So that's why, and that is the call to of anarchism, is the revolution needs to happen in so many different ways and at so many different levels. It has to happen individually, like it has to begin with you. Collectively, it can look like disobedience. It can look like let's turn shit up. It can look like so many things. And I think the most important thing is to make them uncomfortable, and to, because once they're uncomfortable, we are able to, to kind of like to negotiate, or to start being like our voices being heard. But if we leave them like, oh, we're gonna vote, like, go vote for Biden, or I mean, or for any other, like, to resolve what. And one thing very interesting about these systems of oppression is that they will give society just as much as is needed, so society does go full rage insane and be like, you know what, fuck it all, and let's turn this everything down. So
Mhm.
that's how NGOs, that is actually the function of charity. It's make
Mhm.
up for where the state falls, because the state has an obligation to its citizens, which doesn't, like, in reality, the state doesn't how you say, like, um it's not abiding by what they, by the contract. It's not, is, people are hungry, there's no education, people are sick, there's wars, there's all these things. But people continue, like, society continues to believe in this system, and to continues to function within this, two-party system, and under the illusion, like, even when you call the left, that is not really left. There's no United States, like,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I don't see it anywhere. It's all
Mhm.
about, capitalist and benefiting the interest of the few,
Mhm.
and in the meantime, we're here like killing each other and just causing each other so much suffering, because we still believe that they are the saviors, and that we need to be saved. And we don't have to be saved.
So I know we're tight on time, so I'm going to kind of push through a couple of last questions that felt really important for me to share with you. Um, okay, so do you perceive a delicateness in creating a world wherein interdependence does not unintentionally become centralization? By this, I mean that it seems to me that so much political, ideological divide is a friction between the sovereign rights of the individual and the recognition of being a shared collective. And so often the collective persuasion bleeds into totalitarianism rather than interdependence, and the individualism bleeds into separatism. And the result is that innocent people bleed literal blood because our consciousness continues to really clamor for the chasm over the nuance. So, what is your thoughts on how to negotiate, if you consider that a delicate balance as well? It's like, here's all these independent but interdependent voices saying that we have to see through to what's really happening here. We have to see the establishment at work behind the veil of all of these issues that you've presenced and pointed out today. And then there's this imagined collapse. And in its place, there is this core ethos of interdependence. But the nature of interdependence is connected. And the nature of connection, as soon as that's identified as a web, it's first and foremost an easy target from the establishment, so it has to maintain its own separation, if you will, in order to sustain, if that makes sense. Once the interdependent allyship, that federation, that agreement occurs, it seems to me that it becomes susceptible again to become centralization. Like, so much is dependent upon the frequency of the consciousness of the individuals that are operating within it.
So, um, again, this new, wave of, society or communities that we're talking about cannot be creative from the current dominant worldview. So, getting out of that, um, once you're not in that worldview, what's created, it's not going to have so much of that like burden to become authoritarian or centralized. Do you see what I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
to explain? It's like you can't create something different if you're still within the same worldview. And yeah, so when I don't like to talk about like individuals having higher consciousness, because I don't think an individual possesses higher consciousness, or I think is an individual process, but it's also a collective process.
Mm-hmm.
And I think um centralization is a contradiction to both to collective rights and to individual rights. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, yeah. So well said. Thank you for that. There's so much nuance in there, and I appreciate it because it gets lost in these talking head food fight battles that is mostly put out there when these topics are brought up, where it's people yelling over each other and caught up in the blame and the whataboutisms and the hiding in their respective rhetorical fortresses, and their not getting to how do we hold both the individuality and the shared collective that aren't at odds with each other. And the nuance that I heard from within what you shared is that the seed of the consciousness itself that recognizes interdependent nature is not susceptible to centralization by virtue of its recognition of interdependence. So I think that's really a powerful point to consider in terms of the delicateness, which was the heart of my question. And then I think just for all of us that, not to create frictions and adversarial dispositions between our concern for the collective and our concern for the individual, that we're a collective of individuals. And there's an aspect of experience where our individuality matters. And while we're individual, individuation does not imply separation. That there is the nuance there is that we are distinct, but we are not divided. And when that recognition dawns in our psyche, which it always is fundamentally dawning from the, if we're going to go back to yoga, the Purushic perspective, that it's not self, it's not us that are waking up to the truth of our nature. We're always already awake. It's the conditioned mind that is waking up to what it truly is. Came across a beautiful verse inside this book. Last night we were studying in our 300-hour teacher training. It's called the Viveka Chudamani, and it's a text by Adi Shankara. This commentary is by Swami Chinmayananda, and I realize I just threw a bunch of Sanskrit out to listeners, but I'm not saying that for any other reason, not to confuse you or anything, but to honor the sources from which our information is given to us. I think that's important for us. And so the text and the teachers that contributed to this. And the commentary said this about how we move from the inculcation of these imprints on our consciousness, the colonization of our consciousness. And it used the metaphor of, imagine a tank filled with water. and water is the nature of consciousness itself. And then on top of the tank, there's this moss that is collected, and and then the moss sort of obscures the nature of the water, the presence of the water beneath it. If you were to look down upon the tank, you would see moss and not see water. Practice does have an element of putting a hand in, would be like the meditation, let's say, or this conversation, let's say, to cultivate discernment and non-attachment, etc. And it peels back the moss and lets you view just a little bit of the water that's beneath it. And I'm saying this just to set up the point that actually struck me as beautiful, which is that the in service of the how do we get from the state of conditioning that we are in to the state of condition that we aspire towards through this conversation? And the answer given was, you just keep adding water to the tank. And ultimately what happens is the moss is actually the first thing to fall off because it's sitting on the surface. And so it's like, don't get so preoccupied. This is how I came to this. How do I find personal orientation to this? I'm not going to take down the entire colonial system, right? But I can create a podcast and invite a friend who has a lot of bold ideas to share her ideas. Whether you agree with them, disagree with them, if you're listening, that's arbitrary. The point is, let's start a conversation. Let's share ideas. Let's share our poems. Let's share our perspectives. We're adding water to the tank. And if we can just keep adding water to the tank, the moss will fall off. And what is ultimately true, real, and fundamentally unthreatenable will be the nature of the experience that we share. And to the great mystery that is and how it unfolds, I don't have those answers, but I'm definitely here for the questions and the conversation.
It's funny you just
Be
mentioned
well.
that the listeners, and I was like, I keep forgetting there's listeners, and I keep just like,
I know we get so caught up in it's you and I. Yeah, we're recording this thing, and may it live on, and may people actually press pause and stop and ruminate for a while, and then come back a week later, share it with a friend, have meet for coffee, and debate the ideas. Like it's. I knew coming into this conversation that I didn't understand parts of your perspective. I might agree with some, I might disagree with the other. We need to get out of the echo chambers. We need to get out of the silos that we put ourselves in to only speak with human beings that think what we think. And in the larger context of this podcast, Paola, two episodes ago, we did an episode on the Israel-Palestine war with Israeli citizen joining me from Israel. Last week, we did it on the 2024 election and having supporters of each of the different candidates talking to each other, civilly disagreeing with ideas. As I take in this conversation against the backdrop of those two, I'm firmly aware that the four guests that I had last week discussing the election and the one before discussing the conflict from the Israeli perspective, of those five people, you represent a sixth perspective. If we could all be together, you would be sharing something that is espousing a fundamentally different perspective and philosophy. And there's spaces of agreement as well. And that's what it's about for me. So if I want to add water to the tank in some way, it's let's bring out everything. So this idea of we're not going to say it, we're going to become complicit in canceling our own self by censoring our own voice, that can't work. And that got really scary over those last few years. And I just can't co-sign on living in a world where we don't express ourselves. So thank you for joining me.
thank
Thank
you
you.
for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this conversation. And I love and appreciate you. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for this little girl in Colombia that protested the need for that playground. So thank you for sharing your journey and your perspectives. And I hope you come back and we get to do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott.